Hello everyone and welcome to my The Bold Fans channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. According to Monday, August 17th spoilers for The Bold and the Beautiful, BNB, Carter Walton, Lawrence St. Victor, and Steffy Forrester Finnegan, Jacqueline McInnes Wood, will embrace their attraction to one another. As Carter and Steffy give in to their spark, alcohol and excruciating agony will prove to be a lethal combination. In an attempt to cope with her sadness, Steffy drank during the entire flight home from Monaco. Given that Steffy is still in a state of emotional turmoil after all the crazy drama involving Sheila Carter, Kimberlin Brown, it is obvious that that plan was unsuccessful. Carter laid a consoling hand on Steffy's shoulder when she told him that her relationship with John Finnegan, Tanner Novlin, was gone. Carter will undoubtedly soon elevate his level of comfort. This is due to Carter's heavy drinking and his belief that his marriage to Daphne Rose Walton, Muriel Hilaire, is likewise over. Carter and Steffy will most likely have a kiss soon, which may result in them undressing for a sensual rendezvous in the office. It appears that Steffy and Carter will give in to temptation because they will want to experience something other than destruction for a moment. According to BNB spoilers, Ridge Forrester, Torsten K., will continue to be furious about how everything transpired with Finn. Finn will want to put things right as soon as possible, but Ridge won't think he's being the devoted husband Steffy deserves. Nothing is more important to Finn than his wife and the life they have created together. Therefore he refuses to lose Steffy over this situation with Sheila. Finn will have plenty of time to consider how he will win Steffy back throughout the flight back to Los Angeles. Unfortunately, Steffy and Carter's inebriated error is going to make this issue even worse. Even if Carter and Steffy may later regret what they did, their acts cannot be undone. Keep watching The Bold and the Beautiful since spoilers indicate that Steffy and Carter will have some difficulties in the upcoming episodes. Steffy Forrester pulled open the massive glass doors of the Forrester Creations executive suite, the faint glow of the lights barely penetrating the gloom of the late evening. Her limbs were still swaying after the lengthy journey from Monaco, so her steps were uneven. Her only company for hours had been champagne, and the empty bottles on the private plane had done little to ease the piercing pain in her chest. The memory of Finn's face, shocked, begging, still defending the indefensible, kept playing back like a broken reel when she threw her wedding ring into the Mediterranean sand hours before. The metal glinted once before disappearing into the grit. Behind his desk, Carter Walton sat with documents he had long since stopped reading strewn all over the surface. His own marriage was in jeopardy. Weeks prior, Daphne's prognosis had struck like a physical blow, and their careful silent talks about children had become more intense, leaving them both staring at walls rather than one another. He had pledged to support her. He had been sincere. However, the quiet in their house had become more audible than any disagreement. Carter got up without thinking as Steffy emerged in the doorway. Her eyes ringed with crimson and her hair slightly unkempt. "Steffy!" She chuckled briefly and without humor. He walked across the room and led her to the leather sofa at the window overlooking the darkening city, saying, "I didn't know where else to go." The subtle aroma of pricey booze and the more acute edge of fatigue permeated the air between them. Steffy lowered down, kicked off her shoes, and pushed her hands' heels to her eyes. "He allowed her to board the aircraft," she uttered in a husky voice. "Sheila, after all of this, after years of bloodshed, terror, and chaos." Carter sat next to her, so close that their shoulders almost touched, but he was still unable to lock the door. He had already heard bits and pieces of the narrative, such as Ridge's irate calls from Monaco and Brooke's desperate searches, but hearing it directly from Steffy made it seem genuine. "I apologize," she said, lowering her hands and looking at the ground. "I told him it was over. I really did mean it. Or I believed I did." Carter let out a deep breath. "Then I got on that plane and started drinking and I just kept seeing his face when I said it. I understand how it feels." Steffy's eyes darted to him. Looking at someone you love and realizing the life you planned isn't the one you're going to get. When Daphne's news first came out a few weeks prior, she was the one who offered consolation. She had listened as Carter talked about the empty nursery that would never be filled the way they had envisioned, about the silent sorrow that shrouded their union like a mist. The symmetry felt almost cruel now that the roles were reversed. "How is she doing?" Steffi inquired. "I spent a few days in Paris. Need room. Promise to wait. I'm not sure if waiting is sufficient." The silence lingered. The city hummed outside. The only sounds inside were the quiet ticking of the wall clock and the sporadic shifting of the sofa's fabric. Steffi closed her eyes and rested her head on the pillows. The room seemed warmer than it actually was as the alcohol continued to flow through her system, smoothing the edges of everything. She whispered, "I keep thinking about the kids. Kelly. What should I tell them? That Daddy was unable to pick us above the woman who attempted to ruin us, so Mommy threw her ring into the sea." Unconsciously, Carter's hand found hers. His fingers were steady and warm. "When you're ready, you tell them the truth." She turned to face him and said, "And you let the people who love you help carry it." His features were recognizable in the dim light, the quiet loyalty that had withstood years of family turmoil and the composed competence that had made him indispensable at Forrester. That familiarity seemed to be the only stable ground remaining tonight. She remarked, "You've always been here. During every calamity. That's what friends do every time the floor drops out." The word friends hung between them, precise but strangely inadequate. Steffi touched his knuckles once with her thumb. Electricity flowed through both of them despite the tiny, nearly unintentional contact. Carter did not retreat. She didn't either. Minutes went by. Steffi's head slid to the side and landed on his shoulder. The air between them was filled with the aroma of her perfume, which was floral and clean with a hint of champagne. Carter was taken aback by how naturally his arm moved and settled around her. In the abstract position of confidant and colleague, she always fit there but never quite like this. She said, "I don't want to go home. The house will seem excessively large." The proposition was straightforward. "You don't have to." Too quiet. The consequences weren't. Steffi raised her head slightly to look him in the eyes. The cautious control she typically wore like armor had been loosened by the drink. All that was left was unadulterated desire, a yearning for solace, for the momentary quiet of the voice that insisted everything was wrong. Carter lifted a strand of hair off her cheek with his free hand. It was a soft, almost respectful gesture. Steffi gasped for air. Then she kissed him, closing the remaining space. It was not the polished, deliberate kiss of those who had orchestrated this particular moment. At first, it was awkward and tasted like champagne and salt from the tears she hadn't completely dried. Carter paused long enough for uncertainty to flare before responding with the same ferocity. He reached into her hair. She tucked herself into the front of his shirt. After years of mutual support and professional respect, the kiss grew deeper and more intense. Both were breathing more heavily when they eventually parted ways. Steffi looked over his face. "This is a bad idea," she murmured in a hushed voice. "Probably. We're both a mess." "Yes." Neither of them took a step back. The second kiss was more deliberate and slower. Steffi's hands discovered his shirt buttons. Carter's fingertips followed the slope of her neck and the line of her jaw. As the world shrank to the area they occupied, the city lights outside the window faded into gentle spots of color. They relocated from the sofa to the roomy couch in the office's corner, which was hardly ever used for anything more private than late-night strategy meetings. Clothes became loose. Skin touched skin. When Carter's lips discovered the delicate spot just below Steffi's ear, her laughter, part sob, half release, spilled into the silence. He responded with a low groan of his own, one that revealed months of suppressed tension that had now been allowed to come to the surface. The way they came together lacked polish. Two persons grasping for the only thing that remained solid after a night that had stripped them both naked was urgent, almost frantic. Steffi's fingernails pierced his shoulders. With a care that verged on reverence, Carter's hands charted the familiar yet uncharted territory of her body. She let out a quiet gasp as she arched beneath him, one that was equal parts pleasure and momentary forgetfulness of everything that lay beyond these walls. The air cooled their sweat-damp skin as they lay intertwined in the half-light. With her head resting on Carter's chest, Steffi listened to his heartbeat gradually slow down. He ran his fingertips along her spine in languid patterns. Eventually she said, "I don't know what this means." "I don't either. Finn will search for me." Steffi leaned on one elbow and gazed down at him, saying, "I know Daphne will come home." Her features were still softened by the lingering alcohol, but she was starting to regain her lucidity. The candor in his speech calmed her somewhat. "We can't pretend this didn't happen." "I don't want to." She leaned in to give him another kiss, this time gentler and longer. A tiny weary grin appeared on her lips as she withdrew. She said, "Stay with me tonight." "Not in this location." "My location. Brooke is with the children." After examining her face for a considerable amount of time, Carter nodded. "The house is empty." They dressed in silence, which seemed friendly rather than uncomfortable. Steffi picked up her abandoned heels. After they left, Carter secured the office door. Their hands found each other once again and held as the elevator descended to the private garage. A blur of streetlights and soft radio music enveloped the journey to Steffi's house. They didn't say much. After the unvarnished honesty of what had already been said, words seemed superfluous. Steffi led him upstairs without turning on the lights as soon as they entered the dimly lit house. The linens were cold and unused in her bedroom. With the patience that the first urgency had denied them, they undressed each other again, more slowly this time. Passion rekindled, but this time it was more deliberate and less desperate. Carter's hands were led where Steffi desired. He discovered the noises she made when her pleasure took precedence over her thoughts. When she trailed kisses down the middle of his chest, she noticed how his breath caught. Time relaxed its hold. Their bodies rise and fall, their mutual rhythm that developed, peaked, and left them exhausted and silent in each other's arms, became the only gauge. Steffi stirred close to dawn. The curtains let in the first hint of gray light. With one arm still wrapped around her waist, Carter slept next to her. She felt the complex tangle of emotions settle into something she could identify as she studied the contours of his face in the gentle illumination. Thanks, want, and a piercing undercurrent of fear. It was impossible for them to go back from where they had gone. In the harsh light of day, neither of them was prepared to confront the implications of the solace they had sought in one another. But for now, when the city was still largely asleep and the burden of the day had momentarily subsided, she let herself lean against him. Carter's arm encircled her more tightly while she slept, as though even in his unconscious state, he recognized the need to cling. Ridge Forrester, miles away in Monaco, paced a hotel balcony with his phone held to his ear and his voice raised, demanding answers from a son-in-law who had once again failed to keep the family safe. With a bitter taste of sadness on his mouth, Finn stood on a different balcony and gazed out at the water where Steffi's ring had vanished. As Daphne gazed at the city's lights in Paris, she questioned whether the space she had requested would bring about any healing or if it would merely make the gap irreversible. They were all unaware of the silent storm that had developed in Los Angeles during their absence. They were all unaware that, for one night, the two individuals who had always been each other's pillars of support had transformed into something much more perilous and vital. Steffi closed her eyes and allowed the lingering effects of the champagne to submerge her once more. Carter was anchored by her steady breathing. The sky outside gradually grew lighter. Questions, confrontations, and the gradual dismantling of every cautious border they had spent years upholding would accompany the morning. For now, comfort and passion remained entwined in the precarious gap between day and night, and the future remained mercifully unattainable. A few hours later, Steffi was completely awake, and the bed was striped by sunlight. Carter was already awake and observing her with a cautious yet loving smile. Neither said anything right away. Soon enough, words would emerge. Justifications, explanations, and a meticulous mapping of the implications of this night for their remaining lives. However, they just stared at one another for a few more minutes, two individuals who had taken brief refuge in the last secure location. Steffi extended her hand and used one fingertip to trace the contour of his jaw. Carter took her hand and kissed the middle of her palm. It was an easy gesture. Thoughts. She felt something other than anger or hopelessness for the first time in days. She experienced a sense of want. She felt observed. Its promise wasn't fulfilled. They had already rewritten the story of who they were to each other, regardless of what happened next. Finn's unavoidable return, Daphne's return home, the fallout that would ripple through Forrester Creations and every relationship related to it. Answers would be needed for the coming day. For a few brief hours, the night behind them had provided only the strong, flawed consolation of two damaged people choosing not to face the carnage alone. Like the sea air she had left behind, Steffi Forrester was still clinging to the emotional devastation of Monaco. The champagne bottles on her tray table had long since been drained by the time her plane landed in Los Angeles, and the wedding rings that had once represented all she believed she desired were lying abandoned on a far-off beach. The metal caught the light one more time before vanishing into the sand as she threw them with a force that still reverberated in her head. Finn had given Sheila too many chances, and that one choice had destroyed the meticulously restored basis of their union. The drive from the airport was hardly remembered by Steffi. Alcohol and treachery raced in her mind. The argument on the beach, the unwelcome presence on the same plane, and the way Finn had once again attempted to make room for the woman who had almost destroyed their family more times than Steffi could count were all vivid memories of Sheila's incursion. After screaming and crying, she eventually turned to leave, with Finn chanting her name as she boarded the first aircraft home across Monaco's streets. The calm hallways and well-known polished flooring of Forrester Creations felt almost foreign to her when she pushed open the doors. The structure that had previously stood for authority and heritage now appeared to be a makeshift haven. Uncertain of what she was searching for, she made her way directly to the executive offices, where she discovered Carter Walton by himself in Eric's office with a half-empty bottle of something potent already open on the desk. Carter appeared just as devastated as she was. His tie was loose, his normally crisp suit was rumpled, and his eyes were as painful as hers. He was devastated by Daphne's diagnosis and the heartbreaking truth of their infertility issues. Daphne had made it known that she needed space, which reportedly included a wedding ring left behind and a one-way ticket toward Paris, so he had spent the previous evening drinking by himself. Once so solid, they were now on different sides of a gulf that neither of them understood how to cross. Steffi didn't care to say hello. She fell into the chair across from him and told him everything in a thick, shaky voice. The battle, the rings, the finality of what she'd spoken to Finn before turning to leave. She declared, "It's done," and the words hung between them like a verdict. Carter listened silently, briefly putting aside his own heartache. "Finn and I are over." He had already told her about Daphne's incapacity to conceive and the silent destruction that came with that realization. Back then, Steffi had provided him with a kind of unwavering support that only someone who was familiar with family pressure and difficult decisions could provide. The roles were now flipped. Without being asked, he poured her a drink, then another, and the two of them sat in the office's dark light as the city outside carried on with its regular rhythm, oblivious to the fact that two of its most well-known citizens were quietly falling apart. Everything that had been tightly held was loosened by the wine. Steffi described the years she spent constantly watching over her shoulder, never completely believing Sheila was gone forever, and constantly worrying that one more intrusion would eventually destroy what she and Finn had worked so hard to defend. Carter talked of the future he and Daphne had envisioned, the nursery they would never need, and the peaceful nights that seemed to go on forever. The weird connection that develops when two individuals discover they have both reached the same desperate edge at the same moment is the result of their shared anguish. The topic of conversation changed when the wine ran out. What started off as mutual consolation became warmer and more intense. Across the desk, Carter's hand found Steffi's, a straightforward gesture intended to provide comfort that stayed longer than was required. She didn't retreat. Rather, she leaned into the touch, feeling the warmth of his skin pierce the numbness that had descended upon her since Monaco. When their gazes locked, They acknowledged that the people they cared about most had abandoned them, and that they were the only ones who could fully relate to them at that precise moment. The initial kiss was almost instinctive. Carter's mouth found hers with a hunger born of weeks of repressed frustration and abrupt freedom, and one moment they were conversing. Steffi answered with equal ferocity, drawing him in closer as her fingers curled into the material of his shirt. Something far more intimate took place in the workplace that had seen so many business conflicts and family emergencies. Clothes became loose. Breathing became faster. Alcohol and loneliness combined to undermine the strict boundaries that had always existed between them as friends, co-workers, and confidants. With the sole light coming from the city lights outside, they made their way to the couch in the office's corner. With a regard that somehow made the betrayal seem almost delicate, Carter's hands traced the familiar lines of Steffi's body. She arched into his touch, her mind thankfully clear of Sheila's sly smile, Finn's face, and all the convoluted past that usually occupied her.